Hey, what's up guys? It's Pedro here from newcoder.com and welcome to part 8 of my tutorial series on authentication and authorization using the MERN stack. And in this tutorial, we're going to be going over creating our to-dos component. And just before we actually get started creating our to-dos component, I actually made a very minor error when doing our register component. So let's take a look at that first, and then we'll do our to-dos. So for our register, if I was to say Peter123, enter a password and give him a row and hit register, the form is supposed to clear and then we get redirected to our login component. So you saw there that the form did not clear, so let's actually fix that. So what we need to do is actually go to our register component and we need to add a value prop to all our inputs. So for example, we're going to go to our username and we're going to give it a value and we're going to set it to the state value that we have up here. So you can see that we created a user state and it has username, password, and row. So we're going to set that to the initial state value. So user.username. And we're just going to do that for all of them. So for password, same exact thing. User.password. And let's just copy this to make life a little bit easier. And we come down here and say user.row. Okay, so now if I save this, and let's head on back to React. We go to our register component. And this time we'll say Peter12 and we'll enter a password and a username and hit register. And you can see that our register cleared and we get directed. Again, this is a very minor thing I just wanted to fix. All right, so now let's head on to our to-do component. All right, so let's move on. I'm gonna hit Control B. Let's bring up the Package Explorer. We are gonna go within our components folder, new file, and we're gonna create a new component called to-dos. Okay, like always, we are gonna import React. We are also gonna be pulling some hooks out. We're gonna be using the use state, the use context, and the use effect hook. So we've used all of these already within this tutorial series. Okay. Next, what we're going to do is we are going to import a component that we haven't created yet. It's going to be called to-do item. And that's going to be from the same folder. So we're going to call this to-do item. And again, we'll explain what to-do item is. And next, we're going to import our to-do service, which again, we haven't created yet. And finally, we are going to import our contacts. So auth contacts. Okay, so we have a lot to do, okay? So the first thing we're gonna do is let's actually create our to-do component. And this is gonna be a functional component. And let's export this so we don't forget. And let me just close the Package Explorer. And the first thing we need to do is set up our states. So I'm going to say const. We're going to have a to-do state. We're going to have a set to-do state. And we're going to say use state. And we're going to set the initial state to empty. So it's going to have a name property. And we're going to set that to an empty string. Okay. Next, we're going to have a bunch of to-dos. So we're going to have to-dos here and set to-dos. Now what this is going to do is we're going to use this variable to get our to-dos from the database, okay? And that's going to be an array. So let's just set it to an empty array. Next, we're going to have our message. So we're going to be reusing our message component that we've been using. So we're going to have a set message method here. And we're going to say use state, and we are going to set that to null to symbolize that we do not want to render a message component. And finally, we are going to use our off context. So we're going to say use context and pass in the off context. Okay, so before we could go any further, we're going to have to create this service. So remember, we created an off service to make our lives a little bit easier. That makes calls to our backend. Now we're going to create a to-do service, which is going to fetch to-dos and allow us to create to-dos. So let us save this for now. Let's hit Control B, and let's head over to our services, new file, and we're going to call this to-do service. Okay, so let's come up here. And just like our off service, we are just going to export an object with a bunch of convenience functions. So we're just going to say export default, and this is going to be an object. The first function I want to create is to get all our to-dos. So I'm just going to say get to-dos. And we are not going to be accepting any arguments. We are going to return a fetch promise. And the endpoint we are going to hit is user/todos. Okay. And this is going to be a get request. So we don't have to pass in any options because by default, it's already a get request. So then we're going to call then. We should get back a response. And now here we need to check that response. So we're going to say if the response.status does not equal a 401 code. And again, I explained this in the previous tutorials multiple times. It's because Passport automatically sends a 401 unauthorized if you aren't authenticated already. So in order to combat this, what we're going to do is write our own response client side. But if it isn't a 401 request, that means we already wrote a response on the server side. So I'm just going to return response.json, and we're going to call then on that. We should get back the parse data, and we are just going to return that data. Otherwise, let's write out the response for our 401 status code. And we are just going to say return this object. We're going to turn a message. Within this message, we're going to have a message body. And we're going to say unauthorized. Again, this is just to display towards the user. And we're going to give a message error of true. Okay. So that looks pretty good. Add a semicolon here. And we're going to have another function. So our second function, this is to get all the to-dos within our database. Our second function is to actually create a to-do. So we're going to say post to-do. And this one is going to take an argument of to-do. And this is the to-do that we obviously want to create. So we're going to return fetch. We're going to hit user/to-do. And this time, this is going to be a post request. So we're going to have to write that out. We're going to say method of post. And then within the body, we are going to stringify that to do. Okay, so this is going to convert this into JSON for us. Next, in our headers, we have to specify that this is JSON. So we're going to have a content type of application JSON. Okay, so then after all of that, We're going to have to call then on that promise. We should get back a response. And the same exact thing we're going to have to do here. So I'm just going to copy this. Let's paste this. And we could copy this. And paste this as well. Okay. All right, so this is our create and this is our get. Okay. And that's all I want to do for this to-do service. And this should actually be to-dos without the E. Okay. That's our endpoint for our backend. Okay, let's finally save this. Let's exit this. And let's come down here. Let's give us some space. And now from here, what we're going to do is use the use effect hook. So we want to use that to do basically a component did mount. So the equivalent of that using the use effect. So we're going to say use effect. We are going to pass a callback. And we are going to pass an empty array as the second argument. So that's going to force this use effect to execute once, essentially. And we are going to use the service that we just created. So I'm just going to say to-do service. And we are going to fetch all the to-dos that belong to this user. So we're going to say get to-dos. We're going to call then. We should get back the data from that. And then from here, all we need to do is set our to-dos. Okay, so that looks good. And this is equivalent to a component did mount. Okay, so the next thing we should do is let's do our return first before we code any functions for it. So I'm just going to come down here and we're going to say return. And we are going to wrap everything within a div. And the first thing we're going to return, let me just hit Control B to get rid of that. First thing I want to return is a list. So we're going to display our to-dos within a simple list. So we're going to create an unordered list. And let's give it a class name of list group. And again, this is a bootstrap class. And what we're going to do is have some JSX within here. Okay. So what we're going to do is map between all the to-dos that we just got from here. And we want to display them. So we should get a to-do from that mapping. Then here, what we can do is just return a to-do item component. And we haven't created this yet, but we will. And we're going to give it a key of the to-do ID, which is the primary key because it's guaranteed to be unique. And then we're just going to pass to-do as a prop. Okay. Next, let's give us a space. So we're going to put a break here. And finally, we're going to have our form. So our form is going to be to accept the creation of another to-do. So the first thing we're going to do is give our form an onSubmit. And we haven't created this function, but we will. Next, let's give it a label. And we're going to say HTML4 because 4 is a reserved word. And we're going to give this for a to-do. And all we're going to say is enter to-do. Okay, now let's have an input. So we're going to have an input type of text. And this is for our to-do. And we're going to set the value to the state that we currently have, which is to-do.name. And we're going to listen for an on change. Again, we haven't created this on change yet. So let's just put this all in one line, make it a little easier to see. And we'll give it a class name of form control. And a placeholder of please enter to-dos. Okay, last but not least, we need a submit button for our form. So let's come down here. We're going to have a button, class name, button, large button. We're going to make it a primary button, and it's going to be button block. And this is going to be of type submit. And we'll have the button say submit. Okay. And last but not least, we're going to have our message component. So again, this is to display whether or not we successfully created a to-do or something went wrong. So again, we're going to use the state. Remember, we set the message state to null. We're going to check if it's not null. We want to render the message component, and we want to pass message as a prop. Otherwise, we're just going to return null. So that's not going to render anything. All right, so let's open the package explorer and let's actually create this to-do item component. Okay, so this is a very, very small component. It's going to take us 5 seconds to write. So we're just going to say to-do item.js. We need to import React from React. We're going to create our to-do item, which is going to take in props. And we are just going to return a simple li element. So within here, we're just going to say props.todo.name. Okay, then let's export this. All right, so let's save this and we're done here. So now what we need to do is we need to create our onSubmit function and we need to do our onChange function, okay? So let's clear all this and let's create our onSubmit function. So I'm just gonna say const onSubmit, and we are gonna get back our event object, and let's prevent the default. And we're going to use our to-do service that we just created. So we're going to say to-do service dot post to-do, and we're going to pass in the to-do. We're going to call then, and we should get back the parsed data from our server. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is let us pull out the message from our data. Next, what we're going to do is reset the form. And we haven't created this function yet, but we will. And this is obviously going to reset the form. Next, we're going to do a check. We're going to check if there's any errors. So we're going to say if message.message error. So we're saying if this message error is false, what we want to do is we want to get all the to-dos. So we're going to call the to-do service once again, and we're going to get all the to-dos. So this should give us the updated list of to-dos since we successfully created a to-do. So we're going to call then on that. We should get back the parsed data. And then all that's left to do is to update our to-dos. So we're going to say set to-dos, and we're going to pass in. And what I want to do is actually call this get data. And we'll pass in get data dot to-dos. Okay, and then we'll display a message. So the message here should be that we've successfully created this to do. Okay, so after we do that, we have another check. So I'm just going to say else if. And this time what we're going to do is check the message body. So we're going to say message dot message body. And if it's equal to unauthorized, this just means that the JWT token has expired, basically, if we've got into this else if statement, okay? So what we're gonna do is set the message to the message that we get back. So this should be an error message. And what we're gonna do is actually update the global state. So the global state is within our off context. So up here, we set it here. So what we need to do is say off context dot set user. And what we're essentially doing here is resetting the user since the JWT token is no longer valid. So we're going to say username is going to be empty and the role is also going to be empty. And we're also going to set off context dot set is authenticated. And we'll just pass in false. Otherwise, what we're going to do is we are just going to set the message. And again, this would likely be an error message. So this would be like if the client is trying to send a empty string to the backend, it'll say, hey, you can't do that. And this is for example, if the JWT token expires. And this is for if we successfully created a to-do. Okay. So now let's move on to our onChange function. And we need to create our reset form function. Okay, so let's come down here. And I'm going to create a function called onChange. This is going to take the event object. And what we're going to do is we are actually going to update our to-do. So our to-do is a very simple object. We only have a name property. So we want to set that name property to the value. Okay, next, let's actually do our reset form. So I'm just going to scroll down a bit. And we're going to say const reset form. And we are going to update the to-do. And we are just going to reset it. So I'm going to say name is going to be empty. Okay. Alrighty. So I think we are good to go. There's only one way to find out. Let's actually test this. Actually, before we actually test this, we actually need to do one thing. I forgot to set up a route for our to-dos page. So just hit Control B, open the Package Explorer. We're going to go to app.js. And you see how we have a route set up for login, register, and the home page. We're going to create a route for our to-dos page. And we're going to give it a path of to-dos and the component that we want to render. So we want to render our to-dos component. Okay, so we need to import this. And now we should be good to go with testing. All right, so let's test this out. And we got some errors. So line 53. So let's handle these one by one. So line 53 says that this is undefined because this should be to do dot underscore ID. Okay, let's save that. And it says message is not defined. So that's probably because we did not import message. Let's check. Oh, we didn't import it. All right, so let's import our message component. And now let's see if this is working. Okay, so we got our home. Let's log out. Let's log in. So I'm gonna log in as Bob12345. So we logged in. It took us to our to-dos page. So now let's actually see if we could do a to-do. And there you go. And let's see if we get any errors if we try to submit a blank to-do. Okay. Okay, so that's working also. And that is pretty much where I want to leave off with this tutorial. And I'll catch you guys in the next tutorial.